Today I'm talking to Duvvuri Subbarao, former Governor of the Reserve Bank of India. Dr. Subbarao, thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you very much.
Can we start off talking about the state of India? Now, Christine Lagarde, amongst others, was recently speaking about the fragility of emerging markets, including India, as we prepare for the US to start raising rates. Where do you think India stands at the moment?
Well, the worldview today about what might happen in emerging markets in general and India in particular when the Fed starts raising interest rates is shaped by the experience of the taper tantrums of 2 years ago. To extrapolate from that experience, I believe, will be misleading because a lot has changed in emerging markets. A lot has changed in India over the last 2 years.
And what specifically might some of these changes be in India?
For example, the exchange rate has gone through a massive bleeding that it had to, depreciated by about 28% peak to trough. The foreign exchange reserves have been built up. The current account deficit is below the sustainable level, so it's very much within safe limits. Inflation has come down. So all these, I believe, are positive developments that act as a buffer against any vulnerability.
What is the state of the banking sector in India? Should we be worried?
Of course, you have to admit that the stressed assets size has gone up, the quantum has gone up, and that is a big factor inhibiting banks, particularly public sector banks, from expanding credit and from reducing lending rates. So I don't think investors should be worried. But as Indians interested in the Indian economy, we should be anxious about repairing that problem in a credible way as quickly as possible.
And just on the monetary side, obviously Mr. Rajan's inherited a very different time from you, and he's come in as the inflation slayer and certainly succeeded and helped a lot by oil. Is it ever possible we could start to worry about deflation in India?
Well, nothing is theoretically impossible, but in a country like India, where demand is growing, there's supply constraints, I believe deflation is a very far-fetched idea.
Right. And how about the fact that they're now having formalised inflation targeting? Is that going to make life easier and better?
Certainly, having a quantitative inflation target is good for the central bank, good for the government, and I believe good for the financial markets and good for the country. Because the RBI's policy, the objectives and the reaction function when I was the governor, for example, was so loose and so wide that we could do anything and explain that as being consistent with the policy. Not that we were being, completely arbitrary, but it is quite possible that we were not helping the markets where we were coming from.
Now, on the economy, how easy is it for us to actually see what on earth is going on in India?
Certainly, what you can say is that the growth trajectory is on the uptrend, no matter whether you look at the old numbers or the new numbers, and that everybody expects growth to be accelerating. That is definite.
And what does it feel like now being in India, where there's always been this race, sort of rivalry, at least seen by outsiders, between China and India, and now we see Indian growth outpacing China? Does that feel a good thing, or is it just a number that doesn't matter?
Oh, it matters quite a lot, not so much for bragging rights, but because accelerating growth in India is important. Just in order to lift hundreds of millions of people out of poverty.
Can India translate that growth into jobs?
India is coming from such a low base. There's so much of a low-hanging fruit that to keep growth going, at least in the short term, which I mean the next 3 to 4 years, if we do all the right things, it's relatively easy as compared to China, for example, which has matured quite a lot.
Right, yes.
Of course, we've got to have a manufacturing revolution in the country, which I believe is where Prime Minister Modi is coming from, and he talks about Make in India campaign, because that is key to generating hundreds of millions of jobs that India needs to in order to exploit its demographic dividend.
Dr. Subbarao, thank you very much indeed for taking the time.
Thank you indeed for having me on the show.